The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. Pansy and the Shit-Talking Jewelry. February 3rd, 2004. Pansy slumped to her desk in the Aura bullpen that Tuesday. It had been a long day. No, a long year. She was new to the Aura division, having just completed training last November. In another 6 months, she would be expected to take over as Wix for MI6, a prospect she was dreading heartily. She knew a good deal more about Muggles than she had when she'd finished Hogwarts years ago. It was true. She'd dated 2 and shagged at least 6 of them for Salazar's sake. But liaising with them, particularly the military intelligence variety, that was a whole new Quidditch match. "Delivery for ya, Pox." Roger Davies dropped a package onto her desk. It was a beautifully wrapped box, a rich purple tied with a bow of gold. The note was simple, a typewritten label bearing 2 words, "For Pansy." "Did someone already scope this?" Pansy eyed the package suspiciously. She wasn't expecting anything, and her Aura training had told her to be wary of unexpected packages. A sneakoscope might not catch every ill intention, but it was a start. "It's clean," Davies answered boredly. Pansy performed her own detection spells, finding nothing. Hesitantly, she opened the little package. Inside was the most delicate gold and emerald bracelet. "Is this part of the Gibbon case?" Pansy asked Potter, who had just come into the bullpen. Potter shrugged. She and her partner Katie Bell had been assigned a mysterious case involving the deceased Death Eater, Gibbon. Loud clanging and rude voices had been heard from Gibbon's vault at Gringotts, but when opened, the vault had been empty of everything except what they were meant to contain, namely gold, jewels, and heirlooms. Auras had been called to investigate this abnormality. Because nobody was dead or under immediate threat of dying, it had been given to the most junior of them. They'd gone to Gringotts and recorded the vile and tasteless insults passed out by the unknown instigator in the vault. The insults left no stone unturned, insulting not only the listener, but the listener's mother and grandmother as well. Inside the vault, however, there was nothing untoward. The whole experience dredged up for Pansy memories of Voldemort's mysterious shit-talking jewelry that her friends had encountered in her 7th year at Hogwarts. It was not a pleasant thought. She lifted the gorgeous emerald bracelet, examining it from all sides. "Potter, are you getting anything from this? This bracelet isn't calling you a mudblood orphan, or telling you that your father was shite at Quidditch or something?" Potter looked at her as though she'd gone mad. "No." He paused. "Are you calling me a mudblood orphan and telling me my father was shite at Quidditch?" She paused to consider. "Aren't you?" He clenched his teeth. "It's only my professionalism that prevents me from informing you that when you were 13, you looked a bit like a pug." "Woof," she answered with an eye roll. "It's only my goodwill that stops me from telling you that when you were 14, your hair made you look like the lead singer of the world's saddest boy band." He narrowed his eyes but said nothing, knowing it was true. She examined the beautiful jewelry again, no closer to an answer. On Tuesday, another package arrived, this one containing a stunning garnet pendant. The note this time only read, "I'm sorry." Katie was as at a loss as she was. This time, Pansy made Potter put the necklace on in case the shit-talking didn't start until the gems were touching skin. "Nothing," he said tiredly. "Fine. Give me the lazy jewelry back." Wednesday was a peridot choker. Thursday came with an aquamarine anklet. Friday brought a golden topaz set of hair combs. Potter looked especially stupid on Friday, walking around with those on all day. Pansy assumed that Saturday she would receive nothing, since she was not at work. To her surprise, an owl arrived at breakfast with a purple and gold package containing a pair of emerald earrings to match the bracelet. The notes had remained just as concise, never anything longer than a conversation heart. "With love," said one. "Miss you," or "Always yours," read the others. A deplorable lack of shit-talking, Pansy thought, her mind still on her case in the vault at Gringotts. With Sunday's owl that brought a lariat necklace of amethyst, she sent back a note. "Quit being such a coward, and show me your face. Also, I like rubies as well." Monday's ruby and diamond set was so lovely, she didn't even make Potter wear it to check for curses. By Friday, hers and Katie's case had been solved. They'd worked with the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, who had determined that Gibbon had a particularly foul-mouthed, doddering old house-elf named Grimble. Apparently, Grimble had been driven quite mad with loneliness and grief at his master's passing, and had taken to apparating into the vault to feel closer to his old master. Pansy and Katie waited until the elf was inside before resetting the wards and trapping Grimble inside. Then a specialist with the DRCMC went in to convince the ancient elf to accept either freedom or a new master. Grimble agreed to both. Ron Weasley was just setting up his bakery business in Diagon Alley with Fortescue, and needed the help. That night, several Auras joined her and Katie at the Leaky for a pint, to celebrate a case closed. It was Friday the 13th, so many were relieved to be getting the weekend started on a good note. As she and Katie made their way along Horizont Alley towards the Leaky Cauldron, it occurred to Pansy that her mystery messenger hadn't sent any gifts that day. She tried not to let that bother her, then scolded herself for allowing it to. Katie pushed open the door to the Leaky and held it for her. Pansy walked in, then immediately wished she hadn't. Neville Longbottom was inside, holding a purple and gold wrapped package. "I thought I might bring this one in person, so that I could congratulate you on solving your case," he began. She turned and walked to a table in the corner without a word. He followed her. "Pansy, I'm sorry for leaving the country. Breaking up with you, well, it broke me. And add to that all the stuff with Voldemort, the snake, the Carrows. It was all so much. I know I shouldn't have run away from it all." "You shouldn't have run away from me, Nev." Pansy turned to face him, fighting to control her voice. "Before we were a couple, we were friends. I could have been there for you, but you pushed me away, along with everyone else." "I know. I regret it," Neville said sorrowfully. "I could tell. I at least got that from your incredibly succinct notes," Pansy groused. "You knew they were from me?" "Of course. You remembered my rule about no sapphires," Pansy answered with a smirk. "Will you give me another chance, Pans? I'll do anything to earn it," Neville said, approaching her side. She sighed. The truth was, as much as Neville's disappearance had hurt, she did understand it, at least a little. She looked down at the tiny purple and gold box, this one smaller than all of the others. "If that's what I think it is, put it away," she began. "You can stay for a pint with us, but I'm making no promises. Neville readily agreed, pocketing the package. It took a couple of years of friendship, then dating, to win her back. Neville had to write a few notes longer than conversation hearts, but eventually she agreed to accept that last purple and gold package from him. The ruby and diamond ring sparkled on her finger on their wedding day, imbued with a charm to remind her of his love whenever she turned it. For their 10th wedding anniversary, he took a chance and gifted her sapphires. She was pleased to find them delightfully insult-free. Lucius Malfoy visits the dental offices of Dr. Linda Granger. April 2005. Lucius licked the strawberry ice cream cone in his hand, then gasped, holding his jaw in sudden pain. "Darling, you simply must get this taken care of," Narcissa said for the 3rd time that day. "You can keep performing that pain relief spell, but it won't fix the problem, you know." Lucius gave his wife a baleful stare. "Sissa, I refuse to allow the healers at St. Mungo's to remove my tooth. Even if they could replace it with an exact replica of the original, it will never work the same." "Lulu, get in touch with the Grangers. I know wizards don't usually see dentists, but truly, there's nothing to be afraid of. Linda cleaned my teeth 2 months ago, and they feel wonderful." Lucius tried his best to ignore her, but by the time he reached the bottom of the cone, he'd been practically holding his jaw the entire time. He huffed. "I will call Linda. I cannot bring myself to go to Richard for this." "It's a cavity, all right. Pretty far progressed, I might add. I can feel it, though," Linda assured him, snapping her examination gloves tighter on her wrists and readying her tools. Lucius looked in alarm as she whirred the tiny drill. "What is that?" he asked in slight panic. Her eyes widened. It was easy to forget because Lucius was an adult, but it was his first visit to the dentist. She needed to treat him more like the little ones they often saw. "So, this little device will simply extract the bad part of the tooth," she began, but stopped immediately as Lucius began to fight his way out of the chair. "I'll not stand for an extraction. It isn't that bad," he muttered. She put a hand upon his chest. "Lucius, need I remind you that an extraction does not mean what you think it means?" He stared at her for a moment, brows furrowed. Then he gave the smallest of nods. "Yes, of course." Her assistant, Eric, managed to distract Lucius whilst she administered the numbing shots, but at the first whir of the tiny drill, he was once more fighting to leave the reclined seat. Eric managed to hold him down, but only barely. Lucius locked eyes with the young man. "Can you stun me?" he asked pleadingly. Said Eric, pondering. "There are roughly 20 quadrillion ants on Earth, or about 2.5 million for every human. I always thought that fact was rather stunning." There was a reason that Eric was Richard's favourite employee. Lucius turned desperately to Linda. Linda sighed. "Eric, the nitrous oxide, please. Let's just start at the highest setting, yes?" That afternoon, after sitting through Lucius's lengthy litany of smuggled sweets that he listed for her, whilst still under the effects of the laughing gas, Narcissa made a mental note to ask Linda where she'd gotten such potent veritaserum from. Snape's Second Chance at Love. The early 1970s and the years that followed. They had known each other as students at Hogwarts, of course. She had been 2 years behind him, an knowing Ravenclaw with a tendency to act mysterious and all-knowing, due to the fact that her grandmother had been mysterious and all-knowing. A seer by trade and a swindler by choice, her grandmother Cassandra had become quite famous for her abilities in clairvoyance. Sybil did not have these abilities. They had worked together for several years, having been hired at the same time. The year they were brought on board, Dumbledore had shown them both around the school, encouraging them to come to each other with problems, to learn from each other. Severus had no interest in doing that. And so, for the next 16 or so years, they avoided each other's company. She seemed to have a bit of a chip on her shoulder, as though she were better than him. She was incorrect, of course, he knew, but he never felt the need to correct her. In truth, she was a bit jealous, and more than a bit miffed, that he had been chosen as headmaster when he'd had the same level of tenure as her. All of that changed on the first night of December 1997. It was a Monday. Mondays were always bollocks. She had been on her way to deposit her sherry bottles in the room of hidden things. When she got well and truly blotto, her vanishing charms were shite. She might say the incantation until she was blue in the face, and the bottles would remain just as solid and firm as when they had been full. It was far too embarrassing to her when she was sober to admit to herself that she had been the one to drink all of that. So the solution she hit upon was to physically carry them away in order to dispose of them. Thankfully, the room of hidden things was only 1 floor below her rooms in the astronomy tower. It was a secret between herself, Sir Cadogan, and his dapple-grey pony. The horse couldn't talk, and nobody paid Sir Cadogan any attention. It was the perfect plan, she thought. But that fateful night in December, she'd had an unfortunate encounter with one of the Carrows. Alecto had been a sadistic bitch when they'd been at school together. 25 years had not changed much about her. Sybil had tried to avoid her, tried ducking into an alcove and waiting until she passed, but the traitorous clink of empty bottles gave her away. Alecto rounded on her hiding spot deep in the recesses of the alcove and forced her out at one point. Perhaps it was the horrendous cackle of the former Slytherin witch that drew his attention from down the corridor. Perhaps it was the flash of light from Alecto's wand that drew his eye. Or perhaps he was simply following the overwhelming smell of sherry. Whatever it was, though, that night, Severus Snape went from the thorn in her side to her knight in shining armor. "Alecto, what gives you the right to harass other teachers in my school? I realize that your nose is far too large for your face, but surely you can see past it to recognize that this is not a student out of bed past curfew, but another adult who has every right to be here." Snape's acerbic tone cut the tension in the air, and Alecto pulled back as though she had been stung, physically. "Not sure what business it is of yours, Snape," she mumbled, looking at the ground. "Everything that happens within the walls of this castle is my business, Alecto. You would do well to remember that. Why don't you run along? I'm certain that Sybil is capable of finding her own way from here." The sneer on Snape's face, usually reserved for a particularly doltish student, or very occasionally another professor, was now bestowed upon Alecto. And with that one encounter, Alecto trotted away, and so did Sybil's heart. He'd tried to ignore her, at first. A few nights later, as the chilly December lumbered on, she'd come to his rooms in the dungeons. Quite the long haul, if she was honest. She was drunk again. It was Friday, her favourite day of the week. Sybil found that a drink, or 5, was helpful for not just the bad times, but the good as well. Which is why she often started drinking early on Friday, and continued until nearly midnight Sunday. He'd slammed the door in her face. She was undeterred. The next night, she'd dressed up, putting on a few extra shawls beaded with the loveliest gold beads. She'd made up an issue with a student. As headmaster, he had to let her in to discuss it. She'd gotten as far as sitting next to him on the small sofa near the fire before he showed her the door. The next Monday, she'd caught him in the headmaster's office during the day. She was nervous. She didn't typically drink until at least 3 o'clock, and she wished she'd taken a nip to calm her nerves. She'd come around the desk, and he'd turned his chair a bit outward. An invitation? She hoped so. "Severus? May I call you Severus? Or do you prefer headmaster?" she asked, batting her lashes behind her large glasses. "Either is fine," he answered in a strained voice. She drew closer, her robes now grazing him as he sat. "Lovely." Carefully, she placed one knee on the chair between his knees, gently forcing a bit of additional space for her own leg between his. He looked down at their knees almost fearfully, no longer breathing. "Severus, you've always been such a helpful wizard. Have I ever told you that?" "No, I don't think so," Severus said from between pursed lips. Sybil took off her glasses, eyes briefly crossing for a moment before relaxing. "Well, you are. And I find that irresistible." "I see," Severus Snape said, a bit breathless. Sybil brought up one hand and trailed a finger through his hair, bringing it down the side of his cheek and onto his chest. "So irresistible," she said throatily, leaning down to lick his delectably plump lips with her tongue. The door to the headmaster's office opened, and Minerva McGonagall stepped in, looking down at a scroll as she walked. "Severus, we need to go over the staffing schedules for the holiday break." "Oh." McGonagall looked up, seeing Sybil leaned over Severus, looking as though she was ready to devour him, and Snape looking as though he was trapped. "I'll come back," the Transfigurations professor said, backing away. "No need," Severus said, pushing at Sybil's shoulders to force her back on her heels. He stood. "Professor Trelawney was just leaving." That night, there was a knock on the divination classroom's trapdoor. She'd been haphazardly washing the teacups. Her washing spells were shite when she was drunk too, and she lowered the ladder with more than a little curiosity. He looked as uncomfortable and out of place as a scientist at a séance. He dug into his robes, extracting a greenish vial. "Sober up potion." "But I don't want—" "Drink it," he intoned. She drank it. When she finished, he vanished the empty vial and launched himself at her, kissing her hungrily, backing her up against the low counter where the charmed sponge continued its washing. His hands were on her, dragging off her layers of shawls, fumbling through bangles and beads to touch her. She pushed back, bringing them to the ground in front of the fire. She set to work, removing his ubiquitous layers of black robes, finally tearing his vest in frustration, to bare his body to her. It took them a full 7 minutes to disrobe, neither of them wanting to break away for their wands to do it magically. Finally, the copious layers of fabric were gone. As he entered her, she nearly wept in relief at the release of a tension she hadn't even known was there. He called out her name as he came. His black eyes rolled back in his head. As he dressed and prepared to leave, he looked down at her naked form in the firelight, her body barely covered by a shawl she'd drawn around herself. "Tell no one of this. I cannot be seen as having a weakness. You'll be targeted. It's dangerous for you to be associated with me." Privately, Sybil had to agree. It was very dangerous for her, indeed. For the next 4 months they met in secret, her quarters or his, twice in the room of requirement, one very memorable time in the potions lab. He kept her at arm's length and never stayed the night. His stoic face never revealed anything to her, but a part of her held out hope. She checked her tarot cards, read her own palm, peered into her crystal balls for any sign of a tall, dark, and handsome wizard. Once, she was almost certain she'd seen a heart in her tea leaves, but it turned out to be a turkey. May 1998. And then the war arrived at Hogwarts. The war had always seemed remote and rhetorical to a witch like Sybil, who generally kept her head in the clouds, but that May there was nothing rhetorical about it. She'd been helping with the wounded in the Great Hall when he was brought in. She fought the urge to panic, to fuss over him and smother him with her worry and hand-wringing and grief. But it turned out he didn't mind all that. Even aloof and impassive potions professors enjoy a bit of fawning when they're at death's arch. And so, after she'd held his hand through the healing spells and the bandages, she kept on holding it. She summoned him soup and mulled wine, fluffed up his pillows and conjured an extra blanket, made some students who stood in his sight line move when Potter and the Dark Lord began to fight. And then, when it was all over, he took her out for a proper date. When they returned to the castle that night, Minerva met them in the Great Hall as they entered. "Ah, Severus, Sybil, a lovely evening, I hope." "The loveliest," Severus said drolly. "Excellent. Sybil, I'm just about to retire for the evening. May I walk you upstairs?" Sybil looked at him uncertainly, but he stayed her with a hand on her arm. "No need, Minerva. I'll be accompanying Professor Trelawney to her quarters." "I see," muttered McGonagall, but she was unheard by either of them. They ascended the staircase together, exchanging soft looks as they went. Her blue eyes, magnified by her glasses, played across his dark eyes and smirking lips. Sometimes love is blind. Sometimes it's sung about from the rooftops. And sometimes love arrives in the unlikeliest of forms. A white knight in billowing robes of black. The Malfoys, shopping in Muggle London. Summer 1995. "Mum, I really don't think you need that," Draco admonished, coming up to his mother in lily whites. The multi-story shop featured sporting goods from all manner of sports, with the notable exception of Quidditch. Draco had enthusiastically scoured the shop for a set of new Quidditch balls, but had come up empty-handed and was now ready to move on. But try telling that to Narcissa whilst she held this thing in her hands. "What even is that?" he asked, wrinkling his nose in slight distaste. She turned it to and fro in her hands. "It's called a Thigh Master. I'm going to get one for myself and one for your father," Narcissa said excitedly. "Doesn't father serve enough masters?" Draco muttered, but it was missed entirely by his mother. "I really don't need new clothing, Hermione. I've got a closet full of robes as it is," Draco grumbled. He'd seen a street vendor a bit back, and the delectable smell of toffee popcorn had him walking sideways, in an effort to return to it. "You've got wizarding robes, Draco. If we're going out into the Muggle world, you need Muggle clothing. As it is, you're taller than my father. You're showing far too much thigh in those short trousers. People are staring," she said, with a little smile. It was true, but it wasn't because of the short trousers. All morning girls had been staring at him, hard. Hermione had nearly laughed as one poor girl literally walked into a glass door whilst watching Draco cross the street. Come to think of it, maybe it did have a bit to do with the short trousers. "All right, let's try these on, yes?" Hermione found a pair of soft grey short trousers and gave them to Draco. "And perhaps this shirt?" She pulled a white polo shirt from the shelf. When he emerged from the dressing room 3 minutes later, she found herself salivating almost as much as Draco had been at the smell of toffee popcorn. "Oh, fucking hell," she moaned, pushing him back into the dressing room and locking the door behind them. A notice-me-not and muffliato charm followed in short order. Draco bought the trousers and shirts in every colour the store carried. It had been a rather exhausting morning. Despite the comfort of the platform shoes, which were clearly charmed to be comfortable, Linda was sure. She was dead on her feet, and it wasn't even lunchtime. She'd already had to refuse Narcissa's generosity more times than she could count, and her resistance was crumbling. As they rounded a corner, Narcissa exclaimed over yet another new shop. "Is this Woolies? The fine jewellery store where you got that gorgeous necklace?" Narcissa asked. Linda looked up at the red letters spelling Woolworths out on the shop's facade. "It is," she answered in smiling resignation. Before she or Hermione or Draco could say another word, Narcissa had flung out her fingers, magically pushing open the door without touching it, despite it not being an automatic door. "These jewels are divine, Linda. We simply must get them all," Narcissa said gleefully. The blonde witch gestured imperiously to the shop lady, a tired-looking woman in her 60s who looked like she'd been working there since Thatcher was in office. "We'll take 2 of everything you have, please. Package everything individually in velvet boxes."
"Pack it yourself, Queen Bess. Velvet boxes will cost you an extra £1," the woman said, throwing her hands up in the air. She called out to the young teen manning the register. "Archibald, I'm taking my smoke break." With that, the woman shuffled off to the back of the store and disappeared into the break room. In the end, Linda managed to convince Narcissa to only buy 20 of the costume jewellery sets, 10 for each of them. The witch also picked out several neckties for Lucius because he'd had such trouble choosing his ties on his own. Draco carried everything to the register, per his mother's instruction.
"Thank you so much for your assistance, and that of your colleague, Archibald," Narcissa said graciously.
"My name's Chester," the boy said miserably, pointing to the name tag on his red smock. Archibald quit 2 years ago. Madge just hasn't worn her glasses in, 2 years, I suppose."
"All the same, thank you," Narcissa said kindly. Chester bagged up their purchases, even taking a moment to wrap the necklaces awkwardly in a stack of crumpled tissue paper he found under the till. "And a little something extra for your troubles," Narcissa said, holding out a tightly rolled wad of notes to him.
We're really not supposed to accept tips," the teen said uncertainly, waving away the pounds with huge eyes.
"Nonsense! I insist," said Narcissa, and when Narcissa insisted on something, it was generally done. 1 minute later, Draco and Hermione watched from the toffee popcorn cart as the door of Woolworth's flew open. Chester, having counted his windfall, had torn the woolly's smock over his head on his way out the door. He could be heard shouting over his shoulder, "So long, Madge!" as he hurried up the street. Tomorrow Island, October 1902. The snow was so thick on the windowsill of the little hostel that it took all of Puppy's arm strength to push the fluffy, heavy white drifts off. The view was worth it, though. The mountains, plain, and ocean vista outside of the hostel looked like the picture postcards in the shops in the tiny wizarding village below her. In the far distance, a family of polar bears frolicked in the snow at the base of the mountain. As she inhaled a deep breath of the crisp cold air, a familiar sight caught her eye. An owl winging its way across the orangey-pink morning sky. The lovely russet bird sailed close, her wings pulling up perpendicular to the sky above as she came in for a landing on the formerly snowy windowsill. Poppy dug through her luggage for owl treats, and the beautiful bird came in to wait for her reply. Poppy smiled as she recognized the familiar goat scratch on the outside of the envelope. "Sweetest Poppy Puff. Hopefully I've caught you before you reach China. I trust you're finding new and more beautiful sights to see as you go. Thank you for the photographs. The castle you visited that day was breathtaking, but not nearly as beautiful as you. Emmett has hinted that he's thinking of retiring soon, and has offered to sell the Hog's Head to me when he does. I know it's not glamorous. I'm sure it'll embarrass my high and mighty brother to no end, for his only remaining relative to be a lowly barkeep. If anything, that makes the offer more enticing. But it'll be an honest living, and it'll provide well for our family, if you ever change your mind about us. Still, I know your heart yearns for adventure, Puff, and I'd never clip your wings. With love always, Gruff." Poppy sighed with a tremulous smile, and summoned a box of tissues from the nightstand, blotting lightly at her tears before they tracked down her cheeks. Their love affair at Hogwarts had been passionate, but secretive. Opposites truly did attract, it seemed. They'd played for opposing Quidditch teams. He was a Hufflepuff beta, and she was the best chaser that Ravenclaw had had in a decade. He'd barely scraped together 4 OWLs, and she had earned 8 in EWTs. He'd served more detentions than anyone else in their year, and she'd been the rule-abiding prefect. And after they'd finished school, he was eager to settle down immediately, whilst she yearned to see the world. Waving her wand, Poppy conjured a bit of parchment and began to write. "Darling Gruff, thank you for your letter. I'm hopeful that Emmett sells you the Hog's Head. I know you're eager for the responsibility. I'm leaving Big Diomede after breakfast for Shanghai. You've just caught me. How strange to think, by the time you get this, it will be tomorrow for me, and today for you. This island is known as Tomorrow Island, and in the near distance on a sunny day, one can see Little Diomede. It is known as Yesterday Island. Being caught between these time zones here at the edge of tomorrow makes me think more and more of the time we've spent together, and the time still ahead of us. I don't know what our tomorrows will bring, Aberforth, but I do know that today I miss you, and look forward to seeing you soon. The locals here have a saying, tomorrow never dies. Neither does my love for you, Gruff. From Russia with love, Poppy Puff. She folded the letter and sealed it with her wand, then conjured a blue ribbon with which to attach it to the leg of the russet owl. The blue reminded her of Aberforth's eyes, and she sighed as she watched the owl and letter fly away and disappear into yesterday. Closing the window, she turned back to her little room, waving her wand to pack her bag quickly. Shanghai was calling her. By the time she returned to Great Britain, Gruff might no longer be waiting for her, she knew. That was all right. She didn't wish to clip his wings either. But if it was meant to be, perhaps one day, some future tomorrow, they would find their way to each other. Tomorrow never dies, after all. Swinging her bag over her shoulder, Poppy stepped into the corridor and closed the door to the tiny room behind her. On to her next great adventure. The Jugson Blacks take their tweens to McDonald's for the Magic Straw 25th anniversary release. July 2024. Quentin held open the door to the McDonald's restaurant for his family. He and Sirius had eschewed bringing Benjamin and Violet to the lavish launch party hosted by Fixer Elixir Limited and the McDonald's Corporation, in favour of just having a family dinner at one of the restaurants. Benjamin had pronounced the very idea of attending such a posh event with his parents to be skibbity. Whilst Quentin didn't have the foggiest idea what that meant, it gave the general impression of not good. The children filed in, followed by Sirius, who looked as nervous as Quentin felt. Benjamin and Violet had spent their first few weeks of the summer holes with his American cousins' family. Sarah and Jonathan and their 4 young teens had delighted in hosting their British cousins, though Ben and Vi had been a bit reluctant to go. Apparently the 6 children had gotten along like fish and chips. And whilst they were pleased that their lovely children had made such great friends with their cousins, both Quentin and Sirius could do with fewer conversations involving words they'd never heard. "So, what do you think?" Sirius asked, gesturing to the large display heralding the return of the magic straw. "It's mid," Violet said flippantly. "Is that good?" Sirius asked, furrowing his brow in confusion. His daughter shrugged. "I guess it's not Ohio, if that's what you're asking." "That wasn't what I was asking. Isn't Ohio a place?" "No cap," said Ben. "I'm begging the 2 of you. You don't have to speak the King's English all the time, but just around us, all right?" Ben cocked his head as though considering for a moment, then turned to his sister, apparently speaking only to her. "That's mad riz, though." 100 aura points, Violet agreed. Or disagreed. Quentin was unsure at this point. Sirius threw up his hands in disgust and stalked away. "I'm going to order." "Sigma," Benjamin answered.
Epsilon?
Quentin tried, earning a look of confusion from his son.
Oh, I thought we were naming letters of the Greek alphabet.
Benjamin rolled his eyes.
Sus.
Violet nodded vigorously.
Sussy-baka.
Quentin schooled his hands to avoid casting a silencio on his children.
Here we are,
Sirius announced, returning with a tray holding 4 Happy Meals. For all of their cool posturing, Quentin was pleased to see that at least his tweens were excited to find out what colour straw they'd gotten in their meals.
"Bet!"
Benjamin exclaimed, pulling out an orange straw that turned green when used.
"Bet! That's flex!"
Sirius agreed with his son, exchanging a wink with his husband. He reached across the table and grabbed a handful of Benjamin's chips.
"Phantom tax,"
Sirius explained. Benjamin's eyes grew wide-eyed, his mouth twisting in disbelief. Then he ducked his head to continue eating in silence. Quentin munched on his chips with a tiny smile. Now that his father was using some of his words, Benjamin would be loath to continue to use them. There were at least 3 phrases they'd never have to hear again. He turned his smile on Sirius. What a Sigma, he thought. Lucius's Transfigurations Essay. June, 1969. Minerva sighed and pulled a stack of scrolls towards her from the corner of the desk. She had finished dinner 2 hours ago. She'd taken a long walk around the grounds, stopping in to check on Pomona in the greenhouses. She'd visited with Og, the caretaker, at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, where he was teaching young Rubius a bit about bowtruckles. She'd even sat by the Black Lake for a moment to watch the giant squid float lazily across the surface. She'd put it off long enough. She had to grade these essays, and it needed to be tonight. She'd collected them days before, and had already had more than one OWL student ask about their grades. Alice Pemberton had nearly broken down in tears, poor thing. She was hoping to enter aura training after her NEWTs, and she needed an outstanding on her OWLs to progress. Minerva had no doubt that Alice had earned an outstanding. However, there was one student in their year whose future in that regard was rather doubtful. Lucius Malfoy, though supremely confident, due in large part because of his looks, no doubt, could not grasp even the simplest concepts behind transfiguration. Oh, she had no doubt that he would advance to NEWT-level courses. Abraxas's galleons would see to that. But the boy simply did not get it. As luck would have it, his was the very first essay she picked up. She exhaled deeply, summoning a bottle of spiced vodka and a glass from the little table under the window. She read the title. A summary of the pulchritudinous and capricious nature of the transfigured Scherzpuffle, juxtaposed herein with the mellifluous and presbyterian augury. Minerva rolled her eyes, uncorking the vodka and foregoing the glass, swigging straight from the bottle. Her brain already hurt. She was fairly certain that an augury would never be described as mellifluous, and she was really certain that the word presbyterian was made up. After 7 minutes of struggling through the run-on sentences that went nowhere, paragraphs that ended abruptly and scratched through words, Minerva gave up. Pursing her lips, she scratched a reluctant O across the top of the page. As Abraxas would make it happen one way or the other, there was no need to fight it. With any luck, Lucius would pass her class and finish his NEWTs within a couple of years. Then he would get married, probably to Narcissa Black, and he would become her problem. Minerva took another long pull of the spiced vodka. She conjured a blank piece of parchment and stuck it to the front of Lucius's essay with a temporary sticking charm. On it, she scribbled a note to her head of department, Albus Dumbledore. Our Moonraker strikes again. Knott's Nefarious Notions. Late summer, 1999. The tiny bell rang above the shop door as Theo was putting the finishing touches on the display of his new magic mirrors. It was appropriately gaudy, lots of pink and feathers, certain to attract the eye of those most interested in their vanity. Such a shame, he thought, that Lockhart wasn't available for a product endorsement. He turned to greet the entering customer enthusiastically. His shop had only been open a few weeks, and already business was booming. If you counted 8 sales and 3 people wandering in accidentally as a boom. Not. What the fuck am I supposed to do with this wallet? Blaze's annoying voice carried across the shop. I came in here last week, and I nicked this blasted wallet, and now every time I put money in it, it disappears. Theo hurried over, a devious grin on his face, happy to see his old friend. Blaise Zabini had moved back from Italy immediately after Voldemort's death, eager to resume his life in Britain. He and Theo had grown much closer in the past year. Ah, the melt-away money bag. Was it not to your liking, sir? Perhaps because you nicked it, your conscience is coming back to haunt you? Blaise sighed. Did you put some kind of curse on it because I nicked it? Theo thumped his chest, imitating a dagger entering his heart. You wound me, good sir. I'm a purveyor of fine wares here, trying to make an honest galleon. You wouldn't recognize an honest galleon if it bit you on the ass, not. Blaise sniped. If that's a proposition, I'm open to it, Theo said cheekily. But as I was saying, no, it's not hexed or cursed. The melt-away money bag was designed that way. You put your money in, and it vanishes. Blaise looked at him in amused disbelief. Why, on Salazar's bunions, would anyone want a wallet that did that? Theo shook his head as though explaining the simplest of concepts. Keeps thieves at bay, of course. If you've got no money in your wallet, they can't take it from you. And, of course, it limits overspending. Blaise put his head in his hands, rubbing his eyes tiredly. Where does the money go when it vanishes, Theo? Let me guess, back to your coffers. Is that how you plan to stay afloat? I'm offended that you'd even suggest that, Zabini. Quit besmirching my good name. No, the money simply vanishes into a state of non-being. That is to say, it becomes nothing, and also everything. A very Marxist of the wallet, truth be told. Blaise sighed and tossed the wallet on the counter. I want my money back. You didn't pay for it, Pratt. I meant the money I put in the wallet, Blaise thundered. Theo picked up the wallet and waved his wand over it, withdrawing the handful of galleons that Blaise had deposited into it. He put this in the till, under Blaise's murderous glare. My money! No, sorry. That's to pay for the item you pilfered, Theo said smugly. But I returned it. Sorry, no returns, only exchanges. Can I interest you in some diet candles instead? Blaise stared at him for a moment in stunned confusion before speaking. I know I'm going to regret asking, but what are diet candles? Ah, an ingenious invention if I do say so myself. It's a simple way for the user to lose weight. You know how everyone enjoys a lovely candlelit dinner? Of course, said Blaise. Well, these candles insult your food choices, tell you that your gravy is lumpy, or the ham is overly gristly, or that it looks as though there are maggot eggs on your rice. In turn, you lose your appetite, and you don't eat nearly as much, and voila, the weight just falls off. Theo grinned hugely, then raised an eyebrow suggestively. Not that you need to lose weight, of course. Blaise appeared a bit flustered and asked, What else do you have? What about these dashing trousers? What's wrong with them?" Theo adopted his offended look again. "Not a thing is wrong with them, Blaze. They tailor themselves to show off your best features. And believe me, I'm certain some of your best features are within your trousers." Blaze tried, and failed not to blush. "I'll take a pair." True to Theo's word, the trousers did appear to show off his best assets. All through diagonally and nocturnally the following afternoon, Blaze felt as though he had to beat off the attention with a stick. The little bell over the door of Theo's shop tinkled once more as he entered. "Ah, Blaze! Back so soon? How are the trousers treating you?" "I've got to hand it to you, Not. These do seem brilliant. I've gotten several compliments wearing them," Blaze replied. He walked round the shop a bit, looking at the new mirror display that Theo had been working on the day before. "What do these mirrors do?" "Oh, the magic mirror! It enlarges and enhances any skin imperfections you have, a redness or a flakiness, pimples, and the like. Essentially, it emphasizes them over your other features." Blaze's mouth dropped open slightly in skepticism. "Why would you make that, Theo? People already do that in their own minds. Why make it worse?" "Worse? No!" Theo cried. "It simply allows you to see the imperfection better, so that you know how best to treat it. Not that you need it, of course, Blaze. What with your perfect skin and all. Perfect everything, really." Theo stepped a bit closer to his friend with a knowing smile. Blaze grew warm and cleared his throat, looking around at the other items in the store wildly. Theo's eyes dropped to the other wizard's trousers. "Oh, it looks like the trousers are a success." "What do you mean? What's going on? Why the green now?" Blaze asked in alarm. "These were grey when I put them on." Theo stepped even closer, and tentatively reached out a hand to touch the other wizard's waist. Blaze drew in a breath, but did not move away from him. "Didn't I tell you?" Theo murmured. "They're called titillation trousers. When the wearer is, let's say, aroused or interested in the person they are near, they change colours." Blaze blinked his eyes slowly, his gaze never leaving Theo's. "Why would you want that, Not?" he whispered. "It just sends a clear signal. No games, no guesswork," Theo said softly. Blaze's eyes dropped to look at the other man's lower body. "Weren't your trousers black when I came in? They're white now." Their eyes met, both sets of pupils blown wide to take in the sight in front of them. "Like I said, no games, no guesswork," Theo answered as he leaned forward. Blaze did the same, and their lips met, a tiny zing of magical electricity zipping down both of their spines. Theo's hands came up, fisting Blaze's trousers, pulling him in close as the kiss deepened. Theo's mouth moved down to Blaze's neck, no longer holding back the thoughts he'd had for some time now. "Wanted you for so long, Zabini." Without a word, Blaze extended his hand to the shop's door and made a twisting motion, flipping the sign on the door from open to closed. As Theo began to unbutton his Oxford shirt, the two wizards twisted together and disapparated to Theo's flat upstairs. November 1999. Fred and George Weasley had left the shop in the capable hands of their assistant manager, Verity, and had stepped down to Nocturne Alley. Weasley's wizard wheezes had been so busy that they'd hardly had a chance to come and check on their original investor's new shop, but with the Weird Sisters concert in town, many of their typical clientele had abandoned the alley for the afternoon. "When did he rename the shop?" George asked, gesturing to the sign. It now read, "Not's Nefarious Notions, featuring Zabini's Zany Zeitgeists." "And what exactly is a zeitgeist?" Fred asked his twin in confusion. "I think it's what you say when someone across the channel sneezes," George supplied, pushing open the door and causing the bell above it to tinkle. Inside they were met with a far more macabre and spooky-looking version of their own shop. Knott had taken many of their suggestions for decor to heart, but had put his own Slytherin spin on it. Blaze was at the till, ringing up a customer whilst Theo held a clipboard at one wall, performing inventory. He turned away to welcome them in. "Ah! It's none other than the competition, Blaze. Quick, hide the teeth prototypes," Theo said with a rakish grin. "Theo, I told you those prototypes already ran off," Blaze said tiredly. "Thank you, Madam Pince." The old librarian tottered out with a stern look at all four of them. "What did the teeth prototypes do?" Fred asked. "Oh, they were great fun. You wind them up, and they chase you incessantly for an hour. If they catch you, their sharp little teeth bite you on that tender place just above your heel. They were destined to be a bestseller, you know," Theo said mournfully. George sighed. "I'm going to regret asking, I think, but why would you want those?" "Stimulating exercise, my boy. I'd planned to run them as a special bundle with the diet candles." You know, Fred, Percy's birthday is coming up. I've noticed he's been packing on a bit of extra weight. All those croissants with salted butter that the French bring in at the Department of International Magical Cooperation," mused George. "I love it. Not? When you locate the teeth, send us a pair," Fred said, slapping 2 of the diet candles down on the counter for purchase. He turned to Blaze. "Now, tell us about these zeitgeists." "It's simple, really. Zeitgeist literally translates to spirit of the time. It's things that were popular or faddish at a certain time in history," Blaze answered, gesturing to the silver and gold display that took up an entire wall of the shop. One section featured items from the 1970s. There was a pet rock that randomly turned into a tarantula at odd intervals. A display case featured mood rings that gave the wearer a pep talk when they were blue. A row of chia pets grew green stalks of devil's snare for hair. The plant would randomly ensnare its owner's belongings so that they never lost them. The owner simply needed to brandish a small torch at the plants to reclaim the items. "You know, George, we could get all our Christmas shopping done here now. What do you think of that pet rock for Ickle Ronikins?" Fred asked. George nodded his enthusiastic agreement. Next, they checked out the 90s zeitgeists. There were infrared Tamagotchi. No need to recharge or feed them. They just constantly begged for flesh. A jewelry case was inlaid with slap bracelets that transformed into manacles once on. A clothing rack held hypercolor shirts. No need to change those from the original. They were perfect as is. And a small spinning rack held all colors of butterfly hair clips, made from real butterflies. When the butterflies died, the owner had to hope that their offspring within the tiny chrysalis would take over. "Might I suggest a hypercolor shirt for your brother Charles?" Theo asked with one cocked eyebrow and a knowing smirk. Blaze cleared his throat and threw Theo a hard stare. Theo shrugged apologetically at him. "Possibly. He does run rather hot, though. The shirt might always be the same colour," George replied. He wandered over to the erotica section and picked up a string of large black beads crisscrossed with shining silver. "What are these?" "Ah, the Thunderball!" Theo rubbed his hands gleefully, coming to stand between the wizards. "You see, you get a bit of lube, and nope, no universe exists wherein I want you to finish that sentence," George said. "Are you sure? I feel fairly certain that Charles will appreciate this for Christmas, or any time, really," Theo said. "No, the shirt is fine. Maybe that Tamagotchi for Harry," Fred suggested, shuffling them all back to the Zeitgeist display. George nodded. But what for Mum? She's always so hard to buy for. Theo gestured to a display near the front of the store. I just started stocking these. Might this be what you need? For the witch that has everything. It's a steam iron. Mum has a steam iron, Fred began doubtfully, but Theo raised a hand to stop him. No, not like this one, she doesn't. You know how it is, after you use the iron, and you can never remember if you've turned it off. The twins shrugged doubtfully. Neither of them had ever ironed anything, but it sounded plausible. Well, this iron simply stays on all the time. It's always scorching hot, always ready to go, Theo finished excitedly. You never have to wonder if you left it on. You did! Isn't that dangerous? George asked uncertainly. Theo fixed him with a look. What part of nefarious notions sounds like a bog-standard dry goods shop to you? Where's your sense of adventure, mate? George grinned. All right, we'll take 2. One for Mom and one for Ginny. Fred laughed uproariously. Ginny's going to whip that thing in your face, you know. Packages paid for and wrapped for transport, the twins set off for Diagon Alley with fond farewells to the pair. They agreed that they would all get together soon for a night out in the hip club district of Casually, where Fred's girlfriend Angelina bartended. Theo sighed as the door swung shut behind the pair. He flipped the shop sign to closed and turned back to Blaze. Still another 30 minutes or so until we should expect those teeth back. Want to head upstairs for a little chase of our own? Blaze smiled. That's quite a nefarious notion. Why not? Straw. An Origin Story. December 30th, 1991. Marguerite and Lucas were fighting again. Or perhaps they'd never stopped. Straw was uncertain. It had lost track over the last stretch of 90 or so kilometres, whilst their mother Justine fiddled with the radio dial, trying to find a decent pop station over the air. France was hopelessly stuck in the past, musically, an opinion she both thought and voiced rather often on these drives between her childhood home in Hasselt, Belgium, and her family's current home near where her husband Stuart grew up, in Brighton, England. But Justine had a hard time resetting her brain for the left-hand drive rules of the road after they crossed the channel, so Stuart always drove on this trip. Straw didn't know any of that. Frankly, it didn't care. Straw was born in a huge factory in a faraway land. As soon as its paper wrapper was completed, smoothing snug around its body, crimped shut at both ends, Straw was on an adventure. First, a long boat ride. No one in its box knew where their destination was, but there was a general air of excitement. They were all young then. No one knew what was to come. Then, long periods of boredom. They did not move for days on end. Finally, many voices, in a language they did not recognize at first. Not that Straw recognized any language yet, really. But their box was opened, and the smaller boxes inside were removed, and Straw found itself sitting on a high shelf, overlooking a very busy place. There were shouts and smells nearly all of the time. Eventually, Straw began to understand a lot of the words. Its first full phrase that it learned was, "Welkom bij McDonald's, mag ik uw bestelling opnemen?" Eventually, Straw learned the entire menu of Belgian McDonald's, though everyone's perennial favourites seemed to be the Big Mac and the Royale cheese. Always and everywhere, accompanied by frieten, of course. This was Belgique, after all. One did not consider frieten optional with the meal. The salty sticks of potato were simply ubiquitous, always there. And then everything changed in a matter of seconds. Straw sensed the moment near. Its best friend, Straw, had been chosen from the half-torn box only moments earlier. They were all named Straw. This might be confusing for some, but considering that they did not move around much, everyone always knew which Straw the others were talking about. Then it was its turn. A warm hand grasped one end of Straw, and it came out of the box with 3 of its friends. They were shoved roughly into a paper bag. One end of the straws grew hot with the fresh heat from the Freeton adjacent to them. The rest of the straw bodies were enveloped by 4 carefully folded napkins, one for each occupant of this new vessel that they were entering. A note for readers who have never eaten at a McDonald's in Belgique. You will receive 1 napkin per person, and 1 napkin only. Use it wisely. "Any idea where we're going?" Straw asked. None of the other straws had an answer, but the closest napkin spoke up. "In the auto," it said, ruffling itself importantly. The napkins stood in a large stack by the window, and therefore had a much broader world view than the straws. "Ooh, so chic!" exclaimed Straw's friend nearby, Straw. But other Straw was wrong. Perhaps the 2 straws in the front seat of the auto were living a chic existence, but the back of the auto was simply a state of all-out war. First, Straw and its 3rd friend, also named Straw, had their wrappers rudely blown off, sailing away into parts unknown, never to be reunited with their straw bodies. Next, Straw and Straw were forced to do battle, acting as swords for 2 small humans in the back of the auto. They were soon to learn that these small humans were called Marguerite and Lucas. They learned this quickly, because the largest human in the auto kept yelling the names at the 2 smaller humans. "Marguerite! Lucas! Stop this infernal noise, or I shall stop this car! Lucas! Leave your sister alone! Marguerite! Stop singing and eat your chips! For God's sake, Lucas, use a napkin! You're getting ketchup all over my upholstery! What do you mean you don't have any more napkins? Marguerite, did you take his napkin?" Very quickly, Straw was plunged into an icy cool liquid, and the sensation was heavenly. This, then, was what it had been made for. For several minutes, Straw enjoyed the warm, wet sensation of salty lips on its top, and cool liquid coursing through its body. But all good things must come to an end. Too soon, the cool liquid disappeared, and was replaced by only bubbles of air. Then more shouting. "Mom! Dad! Lucas finished my drink!" Marguerite screamed, shaking cup and straw furiously, whilst leaning over the front seat backs to shove the drink at her parents as evidence of her brother's wrongdoing. This set off a fresh volley of screaming. Straw wished it had ears to cover. Finally, after several minutes, the yelling subsided when Justine admonished the small humans to be quiet because they were driving through the tunnel, and Papa needed to pay attention. Straw had no idea what this channel was, but as it brought about a bit of silence, it was grateful for it. Then the next battle began. Marguerite silently withdrew Straw from its snug hole. Straw found itself being jabbed into the side of Lucas, who began grasping furiously for it. Grunts grew into whispers, whispers into whines, whines into shouts. In a fit of anger, Lucas rolled down a window and launched Straw into the dark abyss outside of the auto. "No!" cried Straw, as the wind whipped it to and fro. It banged into other autos. It sailed high, then fell low. It was briefly flattened by a tire, and then it hit a wall. Straw fell hard, landing next to a wad of chewed gum, a used condom, and a balled-up receipt from a shoe store in France. For the next 3 years, Straw enjoyed the company of its new friends, despite the fact that they rested directly beneath an advert for Burger King. It got to know its new comrades, and they became friends, huddled there together in their own little corner of the universe. Gum had come from Aachen, Germany, and had once belonged to a teenager named Kirsten. It had been tossed out when it lost its flavour, a fact to which the formerly delicious pinkish-grey gum had resigned itself. Receipt was French, and was therefore appropriately snobbish. It and Straw swapped lengthy stories of the people and places they'd encountered in their lives. Used Condom was Dutch, and had seen some things in its short life. It was unable, or perhaps just unwilling, to talk. The 4 of them existed there together for a few years, an international melting pot of garbage. Very occasionally they would be joined by something new, a used tissue who was flighty and therefore gone within months, the butts of cigarettes, inexplicably another used condom from the Netherlands. Condom eyed condom with commiseration and mutual self-loathing. They seemed to have plenty of things to say to each other, without any exchange of words. Then he came. Straw wasn't sure what to make of him at first. He looked like nothing Straw had ever seen before. If it had to liken this being to anything, it appeared to be a mixture of used tissue and whatever lived inside of condom, but in living form. It rode upon the back of a large, long animal. "Go back!" Straw heard the odd, gelatinous creature say. Then, "There! To the left! Here, stop!" Was it a hand? Straw was uncertain. Reached out to grab it. It was a hand, attached to a spindly arm-looking appendage. It had Straw by one end and was waving it gently above Straw's comrades. "Yes, this will do wonderfully," the strange-looking being said. He shuffled and oozed back towards the long animal that he'd rode in upon. "It's from McDonald's," the long, slithering animal said. The panting, oozing creature seemed excited by this. "Cheers, Straw!" called Gum. Receipt gave Straw a tremulous salute, too overcome with emotions to speak. Condom lifted its tied-off end and spoke its first, last, and only words to Straw, in a haunted, jaded voice. "Doi." Life changed drastically for Straw. Suddenly its entire existence was wrapped up in this creature. Straw slept with him, and was held in the beast's hands when he went anywhere. The dumpy little man that they soon met called the creature Lord, but Straw got the sense that the little man disliked the creature. Then the creature turned into a man, of sorts. A Straw was there for it, resting on the toilet lid, waiting. Straw wasn't sure what to make of it, but with the way that the creature was dropped into the bubbling tub of water, it forcibly reminded Straw of when the humans used to drop frozen fritin into the hot oil in McDonald's. What followed next was months and years of glory for Straw. It came to be hailed as all-powerful, worshipped by the creepy man known as Lord. Straw was cherished and adored by Lord. It could do no wrong. Straw was living the high life. And then, just as abruptly as straw had been tossed from that auto window in the tunnel, leaving behind the unpleasantness and cacophony of the young humans for the relative peace of life with gum and receipt and condom, life changed again for Straw. The good times were all over. One night, with Straw peeping just slightly out of the pocket of Lord, Straw saw, perhaps sensed, another Straw. This straw was held in the hands of another man, the one that Lord called Cousin. Cousin Straw seemed to do something to the Lord, and then it called out to Lord Straw, "I regret it, but it was necessary." A short while later, when the Lord man took Straw from his pocket and laid him beside the yew twig, Straw could sense a change in the air. Something was different. The twig of yew disappeared, and the Lord man fell with a thunk to the floor. Then, a few minutes later, Straw was splattered with the Lord man's blood. When the flames began to lick at Straw, it could sense that the end was nigh. No more days of glory. No more long conversations with receipt and gum. No more waiting in a box in a McDonald's in Belgium, snug against its wrapper, wondering what kind of life it would lead out in the world. It had been a good life, Straw decided, as it melted and transfigured into its final form. Its chemical contents of dioxins and polychlorinated biphenyls blended with the mostly organic ashes of the Lord man. Both of them released their own unique amalgamation of toxicity into the atmosphere. It was an enmeshment of poison and evil that flew up high into the heavens on a gust of wind. Then it settled back to the earth, a sky fall of noxious pestilence. In their final act, Straw and Lord were united in a state of non-being, which was to say that they became nothing, and also everything, and also pollution. Its time here on Earth hadn't all sucked, it decided, and for a Straw, that was certainly saying something. Danger Mouse and Vulture. Spring, 1979. Simulation ended, an unemotional computerized voice said. A door opened nearby, and Richard slumped to the ground, still suspended from his waist, 6 inches above the ground. Now, however, the red lines that had simulated a trigger alarm system had disappeared below him. "I just can't seem to keep all of my limbs and my head suspended, especially when I start focusing on disarming the system," Richard said in frustration. He had been trying, unsuccessfully, to complete this simulation for 3 days now, and whilst Vulture was incredibly patient with him, he knew they needed to move on. They would be hearing from their forward operatives in Macau any day now. They'd need to go in as a very small team under cover of darkness and disarm the safe in the cellar of the tower overlooking the Jardin de Flora. The highly secure safe was said to contain evidence of Franco Macaulay's fraudulent funneling of more than £191 million from half a dozen governments over the course of the last 2 years. It was an operation that MI6 had been working on for several months, and Richard couldn't be its downfall. His role was to get in, disarm the pressure plates, seize the files, and get out of the safe in under 2 minutes. The time limit wasn't the issue. The issue was setting off the alarm when he lost his focus and his blasted elbow or foot dropped down and brushed one of the infrared beams within the safe.
You've really got to pinpoint on the physicality. Drive everything else out of your brain. You know the process for disarming the system, forward and back. You've got to separate the physical task from the mental one, Vulture said. This was easier said than done, at least for Richard. Vulture was his mentor in MI6, and had taught him so much in his 8 years there. She taught him how to act unassuming and approachable, allowing people to come to him with information, or to dismiss him as no threat because of his easygoing, affable nature. She'd explained how to use everyday places, churches, groceries, and the like, as meeting places and drop zones. She'd emphasized the usefulness of low-tech solutions for problems, how to hide things in plain sight, how to watch for and exploit clues about the weaknesses and sensitive spots within your enemy. And here was yet another task at which she had excelled. Vulture had demonstrated the proper way to enter the safe via the ventilation system without creating any noise or vibrations, disarming the safe's sensors easily. If there were multiple vultures, this whole operation could be pulled off in seconds without a hitch. Unfortunately, her expertise was needed elsewhere in the operation. She was fluent in Portuguese, whilst Richard's was middling at best. She would need to act as the distraction, the supposedly legitimate potential investor coming to meet with Macaulay and his top team. And if all else failed, Vulture was highly trained in assassination tactics. If she needed to kill all 9 of them in an instant, Richard knew she could. He'd seen her do something quite similar twice before. I still don't know how you're able to do this, Vulture. I'm no spring chicken, I know, but you are—
I am going to replace you on my team if you finish that sentence, warned Vulture with a knowing smirk.
Richard grinned sheepishly. I just meant that you're 1 in a million, Vulture. Without you, this would be a mission impossible, he finished.
Vulture looked to be pushing 50, and yet she moved like someone half her age. In actuality, Augusta was just a shade past 70, but that wasn't Danger Mouse's business, she thought. Instead, she winked at him.
Just a bit of magic, you know, and good moisturizer. Come on, let's reset the simulation and try it again.
5 attempts later, he had completed the task successfully 3 times. It was as close to ready as they had time to get. The call came in from Macau. The jet was leaving in 28 minutes from Sutton Airfield, which was a 12-minute helicopter ride away. Richard packed his last few supplies, then located a secure telephone line. He had only a moment, but he needed to do this first.
Susan, can you connect me to my house? I just need to let my wife know I'm stuck at my cousin's place for an extra day or so.
A series of clicks and beeps, followed by the sound of a ringing telephone.
Pick up,
he silently urged his wife. After 4 rings, she did so.
Lindy Hop, love, I'm sorry. That surprise spring ice storm that came up over Cardiff caught me here for an extra day or 2, perhaps. My cousin had a few power lines nearby collapse, and traffic is a snarl out of town. I think I should lie low here and wait it out.
It was MI6 policy that a cover story be legitimate and researched. As such, Richard made it his business to always know the local weather conditions and news reports coming out of Cardiff, where his mother's fictional hapless cousin lived.
I saw the photos on the news an hour ago. It does look bad, Linda agreed. I tried to call and see if you were all right, but the call wouldn't go through. Phone lines were down, too, Richard said before he thought it through. How are you calling me, then?
Linda was ever perceptive. It was one of the 80,000 things he loved about her.
A nearby neighbour's line still works. They asked me not to tie up the line too long, though, love, so I need to go. A handful of others are waiting to call out."
"I understand, Richard. I love you. Please be careful," Linda said, a note of worry creeping into her voice.
"Of course I will. I'll be home as soon as I can, Lynn. I love you, too," he said, then hung up the telephone. A knock on the door behind him. It was Vulture. "Ready?" she asked. "Lifting off in 3. "Ready." As they made their way through the corridors of MI6 headquarters, Richard chanced to glance at his mentor. "Vulture, how do you handle it? Leading this double life? It's easier than you think, and harder, too. I've been doing it much longer than you, I suppose. Your wife is worried about you?" "She seems all right. I just hate lying to her," he answered.
They boarded an elevator, and Richard pressed the button for the roof access, scanning his card to allow the override first.
"We do a lot to keep the ones we love safe. They don't have to know everything, but they do need to know that we love them." He nodded. "I told you my son got married a couple of months ago?" she asked. "You didn't. Congratulations," he responded. "Thank you. They're both in law enforcement as well, and they work together. They both know that there's plenty of evil in the world, but that our job is to keep the world safe for the people we love. We do everything we can to protect them. Sometimes they know it, and sometimes they don't." He smiled, patting his friend on the arm as the elevator doors opened onto the roof. The wind generated by the helicopter whipped around them, and they gave the thumbs up to Bogart and Swizzle, the rest of their team. The 4 of them raced for the helicopter, climbing aboard and taking off quickly for Sutton. Linda replaced the telephone handset in the cradle and sighed. Her husband was off doing his, well, whatever it was he did. Linda had a vague idea, and also made it her business not to have a vague idea. If Richard had been able to tell her, he would have. She turned back to the stove, turning off the sauce that she'd been reducing for the pork tenderloin in the oven. The sauce had begun to scorch when she'd answered the telephone, in any case. She put away the box of matches she'd laid out for the pair of romantic candles on the table. The fancy dishes that Octavia had insisted they must register for when she and Richard married, she stowed away in the curio. If they'd used them tonight, it would have been a whopping 4 times in their 7-year marriage, not counting when the Cavendishes visited. Tonight was meant to be an occasion. Earlier today they'd received a grainy black-and-white photograph in the mail from Eloise, the young woman from whom they'd hoped to adopt a baby in September. The tiny black-and-white image was difficult to make out, but there was clearly a lovely little baby head, and 10 tiny, delicate fingers. It was a healthy baby girl, Eloise said in her letter. Their baby was beautiful and perfect, Linda could already tell. It was hard to explain the feeling she got from this tiny black-and-white photo, but looking at it, Linda had no doubt that their little girl would be nothing short of phenomenal. Linda giggled now, letting her happy tears flow. They'd chosen names months ago. Horatio for a boy, and for a girl? "Hello again, Hermione," Linda said, with a tremulous smile, running her finger across the little hands in the photo. She propped the photo in the center of the dining room table, in a place of honor, pausing for one more look before she turned off the lights and left the room. In time, they'd blow out candles on birthday cakes at this table. Hermione would tell them about her day at school here
over dinner. One day, she might bring home a boy for them to meet, and the four of them would sit here and enjoy a meal together. Back in the kitchen, Linda withdrew an everyday plate from the cupboard and served herself some mash and asparagus. She sliced a bit of the sauceless tenderloin and carried her plate and a cold Smithwick's to the living room. Snapping on the telly, she caught the opening strains of the Charlie's Angels theme and settled on the sofa for a cozy night. She might be alone tonight, but she knew it wouldn't be forever. Lucius and Jolly, October 2023. Josh. "Look what the owls brought in," Ollie said. Josh fought against rolling his eyes as the majestic sable-coloured owl pecked at the windowsill, demanding entry. At times, when their backer got well and truly excited about an idea, he forgot that he owned a mobile and sent his blasted pet owl, of all things, with a note for them. Though, with as scattered and confuzzled as Lucius sometimes was, perhaps he'd just forgotten to charge the thing, Josh guessed. The owl stepped inside and waited somewhat patiently, whilst Josh removed the letter from its leg. Then he started feasting on Josh's popcorn. Josh shooed him away. The owl seemed to give him an angry glare before taking off, certain to flap his wings in Josh's face. "Dearest Joshua and Oliver, today my friend Richard and I find ourselves in one of the southernmost parts of America. The atmosphere is spectacular, and the food has been out of this world. Perhaps an episode might feature the pair of you trying such delectable treats as pralines, beignets, and king cake in New Orleans. In fact, there is all manner of unusual and tasty food to try here. I've heard from several locals that with Mardi Gras approaching, the city will be a truly extravagant sight to behold. Your friend, Lucius Malfoy." Josh looked up from the note. "Ollie, here's another episode idea from Luke. I think he wants us to do a whole series at Mardi Gras in New Orleans. Cancel your plans for February." Ollie sighed and chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Just add it to the pile, Jay. He realizes we're only 2 people, right? What does he think? We and the crew can just snap our fingers and magically find ourselves in Louisiana?" Josh snorted in laughter, throwing a piece of popcorn up to the ceiling and catching it in his mouth. "Apparently, if you have untold gobs of cash, you can do that, I suppose. He called 2 days ago from Greece. Had a whole list of foods for us to try." Josh chuckled. The 2 men weren't too overly fussed, however. Whilst mysterious wealthy tycoon Lucius Malfoy could be a right pain in the ass sometimes, he did provide the backing, and occasionally some of the ideas, for the pair's successful social media presence. With nearly 1.5 billion views, Joshua and Ollie were comfortable in their own right now. But it had taken some time and money to get there. When they started out, they only had a few vague ideas and very little cash flow. Enter Lucius Malfoy. Lucius had no interest in being in front of the camera himself. Blimey, at times he seemed downright afraid of the cameras. But his travels and his friends had brought him in contact with all manner of sweets and treats from all over the world. When Lucius's son and daughter-in-law showed him a few of their early videos, Lucius had gotten in touch with them, offering his money in exchange for, well, Josh and Ollie could never be certain, but it seemed that Lucius simply wanted a reason to sample scrummy new treats. With their social media presence, he had the excuse that he was just working on generating content. He could try foods from all manner of places, all in the name of research, and Lucius's wife could hardly fault him for that. It was the flimsiest of excuses, but Lucius's wife Cissa didn't seem to mind too terribly much. Her husband noshed to his heart's content, and she shopped and visited galleries and museums and interesting places around the world. And Josh and Ollie, or Jolly, as they were known on social media, benefited as well. Suddenly, their expenses were covered. Crew, lodging, products, permits, equipment, all taken care of. Creating social media content became infinitely easier for them, with Lucius as a backer. It also helped that Lucius came up with hilarious content ideas, and knew plenty of well-connected people. It was how they'd been able to do such episodes as Inside Great British Bake Off Champ's Home Kitchen. British dentists try American Halloween treats. Elderly British gentlemen try all the flavours of unhinged binge. Stuffy British school teachers try new Fixer Elixir flavour Whack Crack. Posh British socialite tries Burger King for the first time. Inside Fixer Elixir factory with its CEO. British high schoolers try American Thanksgiving. British high schoolers try Popeye's chicken. British high schoolers try Mountain Dew. The British high schoolers' content was some of their most successful, and they were lucky that Lucius was on the board of governors for some potsy, exclusive school in Scotland. He'd eased the way for them to film the students trying all manner of foods in the last few years. Ollie was scrolling through photos on his mobile of the various foods they could try in Louisiana. Oh, this looks interesting. It's called jambalaya. I don't see any jam in it, though I suppose we'll just have to find out what flavour of jam it is when we get there. Josh stood and stretched. Hopefully strawberry. Well, if we're heading for New Orleans in a few months, better start making plans soon. But for now, I'm headed home. Good night. Ollie watched his friend close the office door. Then he opened up his mobile messages to text his wife. How did today go? 3 dots appeared below his message, and in a moment came her response. She seemed to have a grand time. Narcissa and her daughter-in-law were wonderful hostesses. They were very open and honest about the whole experience. I still find it all a bit hard to believe, though. What an absolute understatement, Ollie thought. He'd always thought that his adorable 6-year-old daughter was amazing, and special in a million different ways. Everyone thought that about their children, of course, but his little girl always seemed like a beacon of light in an otherwise dull and dreary world. Sometimes it felt like she led a charmed life. The bakery around the corner always had her favourite cookie ready when they stopped in, and the shopkeep never failed to give his girl the largest one. When she climbed a tower of precariously stacked toys in her room, which happened regularly, she never fell. 2 months ago, they'd both looked away for 10 seconds whilst she was meant to be trying one single half of one tiny, apparently disgusting Brussels sprout. They were talking, and when they'd both looked down at their plates, their daughter announced, "Finished with Brussels sprouts!" Every Brussels sprout in the house, on her plate and theirs, as well as the uncooked ones still in the refrigerator, were gone. And when their daughter was 2, and had accidentally tossed her favourite stuffed dog, Bernie, from her pram on a busy sidewalk in London, Bernie had somehow appeared back in their flat the next day. Neither Ollie nor his wife could fathom how. Bernie had been in the pram, They even had a photo of him from that day. And they'd torn the pram, their bags, and the flat apart, whilst their daughter wailed miserably for the lost toy. Ollie's wife had even gotten on Amazon to order a new Bernie, which would not be here for 5 hellish days. And yet, there was Bernie, in the cot, with their daughter when they came in the next morning. There was no doubt that it was Bernie. His fluffy white chest was still stained with Cadbury drinking chocolate, and one eye was coloured blue from when his little girl found a collection of felt tips once. Sure, they chalked it up to confusion, sleep deprivation, some odd mix-up. But in their minds, he and his wife both knew for certain that Bernie had been gone. Lost. They'd had no good explanation until a few weeks ago. It was a Saturday morning in September, and there'd been a knock on the door. Ollie answered, surprised to find Lucius's wife Sissa, the lady dentist from their Dentist Try Halloween Sweets video, Lydia or Linda, he was almost sure, and a third woman, whose rather severe hair bun and cat-eye spectacles oddly complemented her floor-length green dress. It took Ollie a moment to place her, but then he realized she'd been in the episode with British schoolteachers trying whack-crack. As the 5 of them sat around the living room, what they had to say seemed mad at first. Ollie and his wife had always thought Lucius seemed off, but now Ollie thought Sissa was a total nutter for suggesting what she did about their daughter. But the more that the 3 women talked, the more that the little things his daughter did seemed to make sense. Narcissa turning their sofa green was pretty convincing as well. The older woman, who it turned out was a professor at the posh school of which Lucius was on the board, explained that their school catered to children like his daughter, special children with a particular gift. Then they explained. "She's a witch," his wife had asked. "That's why she can do these things." "What kind of things has she done?" the older woman inquired kindly. They told her, and the woman nodded. "Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry has an excellent integration program for children born magical, and also for their non-magical parents. It's quite extensive, and it begins when the children first experience bouts of accidental magic, usually between the ages of 5 and 7. "Your daughter doesn't have to go to Hogwarts, though she'd be welcomed, of course. But she can attend magical classes and playgroups starting now, and you can learn a bit about our world during these meetups as well," Narcissa Malfoy said. The dentist, Linda, spoke up. "I know this is all very overwhelming. I was in your shoes when I learned that my 11-year-old daughter was a witch several years ago. But over the last several years, we've worked to set up this program, to integrate our children much earlier, so it's not such a sweeping change for them." Today was their first magical playdate. Narcissa had brought Ollie's wife and daughter to the Malfoy residence for the afternoon, to play with the Malfoy's 6-year-old grandson and another little girl around his daughter's age. Ollie wrote back, "What's your take on all of it?" Her reply took a while, but she finally wrote back, "It's going to be an amazing life." Thank you for listening to The Muggle Death Eater by Great78. If you enjoyed this work, please consider recommending it to others. For other works, please check out my profile on Archive of Our Own, or my other podfics on my Spotify channel, Silver and Copper.